You're listening to episode 335.
Welcome to Transforming Missions Podcast, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
There's a sweet spot of hope.
And what is it?
Well, when our thinking of the future overlaps our thoughts about what needs to happen today. It's there we believe that our ability to make the future better than today, and we recognize the limits of what we can control.
Okay, I'm going to invite you to say that one more time.
Okay, let me share it the way Shane Lopez says it. And this is a quote. In the sweet spot of hope, our thinking about the future overlaps with our thoughts about what needs to happen today. So in the sweet spot of hope, we believe in our ability to make the future better than the present, while at the same time recognizing the limits of our control.
Thank you for saying that twice. I wanted you to say it again because there's good insight there for leaders in leading in the sweet spot of hope.
So let's do a little experiment. I'm going to invite all of you to be a part of it. So here's what I want you to do. Consider for a moment a recent accomplishment or the anniversary of a meaningful accomplishment.
And hear what Tim said there. It's important that it's recent. Let's say in the past 6 months. And once you have that accomplishment in mind, we have another question for you. Do you have it? Did you think that accomplishment was possible 3 to 5 years ago?
No.
Me either.
Now, take a minute to envision what might be possible in the next 3 to 5 years.
And if I have any company here, let me offer this reminder. We are capable of more than we can imagine, and we have a hard time staying realistic about what the obstacles, the problems, and the possibilities, all of what lies ahead. So 5 years from now, what do you want your life to look like? That seems like a big question. So give it your best creative, thoughtful, prayerful attention and answer that question. 3 to 5 years from now, what might be possible? What do you want your life to look like?
Yeah, this connects back to our last episode where we explored agency a little more as a leader. Negative thoughts or messages are no more realistic than your highest goals, and they rob you of agency. Now, get that. Your negative thoughts and messages are no more realistic than thinking that you've got something out there that you can't achieve. So what then is the leader's task? You create space for people to have agency and recognize the good, bad, and the ugly.
So here's how I'd say it. This is where armor isn't necessary. Armor being all of those actions and attitudes and sayings, perhaps, that we use as human beings to protect ourselves. When people have agency, when people are led with hope, they don't have to self-protect.
I'm wondering what stops hope. You just named one thing.
So here are two more. Entitlement and passivity are hope killers.
Shane Lopez said that, right?
Shane, that comes from the research around hope, yes.
Yeah, I wanted people to know that we've actually researched hope, and this is not just our coming up with something. But I do want to, with that being said, I do want to put my part into this.
There has to be a biased opinion about it.
That there are a couple of things that can really, in listening to what Lopez says, the feeling of entitlement gets in the way of hope a lot of times. And I'm gonna say that in terms of the church, when there are people that feel like that they've paid their dues and you haven't paid yours, your idea is not as good as theirs. That's one way that shows up. And it really hurts us moving forward. And you'll hear it in ways that comes out. It sounds like it's positive, but it's really a negative way of thinking. And that is, if you're a leader and you hear somebody say, we don't know who you are or how you think, or you don't know who we are and how we think, those are usually signs that somebody is having a little difficulty with what you're thinking or saying. The other one that shows up a lot, and that is, and it comes in several ways. I've heard it this way in my past, and that is, that's a great idea. We all agree with it. Why don't you just go ahead and do it? In other words, we're not going to be a part of it, but you can go ahead and do it if you want to. That gets in the way of hope. That is an obstacle to getting there.
It sure does. Is there more that you want to say there?
Oh, Sarah, I can keep going, but I think those are two examples that everybody understands.
Okay. So if I might add one more thought to that, because hope can also be neutralized by naysayers and negative messages that deplete you. They can sap your agency and keep you stuck in one place. So disputing those messages can help you reclaim where you were heading and the hope to keep moving, to find that different pathway and why that goal matters to you, why it mattered to you in the first place. So the other part of that is not dismissing the things that are said. Put them to a test and ask yourself, what in what is being said is meaningful feedback for you, and then ignore the rest of what is being said. Acknowledge how your view of the present keeps you right where you're at, and take that meaningful feedback that you might receive, even if it might come to you in a negative way, and use it to keep moving forward.
Yeah, Sarah, you've said a couple of things there that have me thinking that leaders, I think, need to keep in mind. And one of them is, and this is a big one, because we usually don't have a systemic way of receiving it, and that's feedback. Feedback is information, and it's not necessarily a value information. We put value on it by the way we receive it. Some of it's helpful, some of it isn't, but we stay adaptive when we put feedback to the test and we use what's helpful, and we're constantly improving when we do that. So even when you receive something that you perceive as being negative, understand that it may be something that helps you become more who you're supposed to be, and you're improving on your, if I may say it this way, hope journey. The second was dispute the naysayers. Now, you might already be thinking this, but one of the questions I ask people I lead is, what do you need from me? What do you need from me to do what you need to do? Now, I may offer feedback, redirection, alternative ideas along with it, but who am I to think that God only speaks to me? You may have the best idea because God's speaking to you. Why would I want to get in the way of that? So that's part of the reason I asked that. What do you need from me to get where you need to go? And it's pretty easy for me at times to be able to understand whether it's a God idea or some other idea.
Or the bad sausage that somebody had for breakfast.
Right.
So I'll say it because you won't. You facilitate hope when you ask that question. And as Christ-centered leaders, anticipating that God is speaking to others improves the acoustics for everyone. We all have bad sausage from time to time. It's our human nature. But that question is facilitating hope.
Let's circle back to where we started, inviting you to consider where you wanted to be in 3 to 5 years. Here are a couple of additional questions to consider with that. Who makes you feel like you matter? That's one question. And what really matters to you? So as you're considering where you want to be 3 to 5 years from now, who makes you feel like that you matter? And what really matters to you? Now, these questions help you reconnect with your identity and purpose, which it just helps you take hopeful action. In the sweet spot of hope, we know that our present does not determine the future. You can evaluate the present circumstances, abilities, resources realistically without getting discouraged if they need to be built up. Sarah, help me here.
So in that sweet spot, I think it goes back to what we started to name in the previous episode about sometimes to continue on the journey of hope, there is work required. And so as you think about where you are currently, and I'm just thinking of a church that I'm working with, and the community around them has changed, and their heart's desire is to be present to the community, but they're having a hard time making those connections. Some of that is because of habits. Some of that is because they just don't know. Some of it is because, well, they're tired and they need to rest and pause for a minute before they move forward. So in that sweet spot, you can name all of those things. And it's not a criticism of we're not doing everything that we can, or we're not connecting with the community, or this isn't turning out how we want it to be. It's here are the resources that we have. And what we very much want to do is build a relationship with the people that are in our community. So who are we, and what abilities do we have, and what skills do we need to learn, and what relationships might we need to develop to actually get to that goal? And so the sweet spot of hope, it's almost a paradox of, it's not that God's going to just hand it to you on a silver platter and say, yeah, go ahead and live with hope. That would be wishful thinking, and God wouldn't likely be involved in that. Instead, God's inviting you to take the next faithful step and look around you and see what you have and take stock of it all and keep moving towards that goal, trusting that no matter how long it takes, God is there with you and inviting you into it. And if you just take the next step and then the next step, eventually, day by day, one step at a time, with all of everything that's happening around you, you will get to that goal. Maybe it would help to contrast it if you're not in the sweet spot of hope. It's the wishful thinking that we talked about in the last episode. You're saying, well, someone's going to come along and they'll just take care of this. Or the money tree out back is suddenly going to bloom and give us all of the financial resources that we need. And neither of those things are realistic. You're not on that path of hope.
As I was listening to you, the part that kind of struck me more than anything else is that sometimes, well, we've just got two different kinds of thoughts that go on in the church. And one of them is, as we've talked about it, God's going to do this for us. And if we're just faithful enough, God will take care of it. And I don't want to discount that, but, I'll say it this way. Every time I've gone to God and said, God, I need to hand this over to you, God hands it back to me and said, I've given you everything you need to take care of it.
Right.
Then there's another thought that if we don't take care of it, nobody else is going to. So it's all upon us. And that is where I think we come up a lot with the scarcity mentality. Because if it depends on us, we just don't have enough. And I think where we're talking about the sweet spot of hope is where we actually trust God with what we have to be able to take the next step. There is a preferred future I think God has for us, and I can talk about that in broad terms, but starting right where you are right now with who you are and what you have and trusting God for that next step actually will get you closer to what God's preferred future is than you trying to do it on your own or sitting back and saying, God will take care of this for us.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking of is it's a phrase that I've heard you use, and it's not just a phrase. There's depth and meaning there, and I'm hoping that as I say it, you can then flush it out through the lens of hope. When we talk about the sweet spot of hope being that we know our present doesn't determine the future, when I've heard you say, no matter who you are or what you've done, God loves you, that's a statement of hope. That's a sweet spot of hope. It's reflecting that very statement of, we know that our present doesn't determine the future.
Right. Well, if we certainly believe in redemption of God's love and grace, where we are at the moment, we may have done what we've done to get us to this moment, but that doesn't determine the next step.
Right.
And that's what you're saying. No matter who you are, or what you've done, you are loved.
Right.
That's the message. For me, that's the message of hope the church has to be able to say to individuals as well as the community. We're in this together, but we don't have to stay stuck. We can take the next step. The other thing I was thinking about, Sarah, and you'll tell me whether I've missed it or not, but we actually have a tool to help us understand where we are and what assets we have to move to the next place. It's called 7 Missional Questions. Because one of the things you said that I was stumbling with there just a minute ago was understanding our resources or knowing our resources. Well, do we know the resources of the community, the assets that are in the community?
Right.
And how do we connect with those, not for the purpose of using them, but for the purpose of developing a relationship that says to us, now you have something, you're now related to someone, something that'll help you take the next step. And just an easy example that we've used over and over is that one of the greatest resources you have in any community is the local school, right, and the principal. And how much farther down the road you are if people in your church are teaching in that school or part of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've learned, and then I'll be quiet, and that is some churches have a great connection to the community. They've got people who are involved in the community. They're doing lots of wonderful things, but they don't see those as doorways into the future. What they're doing is, this is what if you're just feeding people because they're hungry, you're a social agency. If you just gather together because it makes you feel good or you're doing something, that makes you more of a social group. But if you can actually take those relationships and what you're doing and put them together around the love of God, I'm going to say a word that's going to put some people off. That would make you a social gospel. That would make good news become real.
Yeah.
So the sweet spot is bringing the good work you're doing and the good fellowship you're having together so it makes a good thing in the community.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you named the 7 missional questions and what you just said of bringing together, where I went was, what are the points of intersection in responding to those 7 missional questions that lead you along one of those pathways to the goal that you're trying to achieve. That's where you're going to find and encounter hope. It's at that intersection point. That's the sweet spot. Because in that place, you're beginning to recognize what is in common and what's going to move you forward toward your goal. So if part of what you're trying to do is engage with the community, and you have a conversation with a local school, and part of what they're looking to do is make sure that every second or third grader has a reading buddy. Okay, there's a point of intersection. Right. There's an opportunity to say, okay, this is something that we could step into. And it might not be the only intersection. So then you have to make, a decision about what's going to help you take that next step. What's going to move you forward toward that goal. And I think the question that we brought up of thinking back about something that you've accomplished and then thinking ahead towards something that you hope to achieve, it's an illustration and a reminder of the work that needs to be done. That God isn't a magic genie somewhere that just makes things happen. God empowers us with gifts and talents and resources to make the things happen that God has placed in our path and is opening us and inviting us into. I don't know what those all are in your local context, because God's helping you to see them. But you have been empowered to do that work, and think of what might be possible if you're able to name a goal in your local church. Where do we want to be 3 to 5 years from now? Who do we want to become? Who is God inviting us to become? I'm almost certain that it's more, what will happen in those next 3 to 5 years is more than you can ever imagine right now. And that's the beauty of hope. Hope begets hope.
Sarah, you've just said it the best that it could be articulated. I am grateful for the way you've not only said it, but for the way you embody that kind of hope. And I'll do it this way. 5 years ago, we're dreaming about something that we had no idea about. I think we even wrote some ideas down on a napkin in a restaurant and said, we should have a podcast. Yep. And then there were times we'd have conversations and we'd say, we should save that for the podcast.
Why didn't we record that? That would have been a good podcast.
Why didn't we record that? And we're 335, 36.
This is 335.
We're 335 episodes in now. 335 weeks ago, we were looking at each other and saying, wonder how we could best resource leaders in the district. I think is the way we started.
Yeah.
And then the idea of a podcast. There have been obstacles, not obstacles that say you can't do a podcast, but there are obstacles about, like the first time we met in the same room across the same table and tried to put up foam blocks so we could have the sound right. And today we are at least 2.5 hours apart in 2 different states with different equipment.
Well, and I think during COVID, we might have even recorded when I was in Ohio and you were in Tennessee.
I think we did. That's overcoming the obstacles. That's facing what we need to face. But the sweet spot in all that was that God was doing something in our lives, and we were saying, how do we best move forward with this? And with all of your expertise in not only theology, but technology, we're now sitting here doing this. This is really cool. So I'm trying to find an illustration that there's no way that when we started this, I would have thought it would be like it is now. And that our audience has grown. And there are people who actually not only listen to us, but want to listen to us.
Yeah. And I remember those first 10 episodes were hard. They took a long time to record, a long time to edit, a long time to process, because we were learning. And I don't say that to say, oh, look what we figured out. I say it to say, sometimes when you're working on something, when you're just getting started, it's hard. And you got to work through the hard and that can be an obstacle because that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of falling down and getting back up. It takes a lot of bumping into things and working around things and a whole lot of focus to stay focused on the goal that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, not to keep belaboring it, but there were points that just knowing the work that you were doing, I was thinking, is this worth it? I mean, you were putting a lot of effort into it, and you still do. I'm not saying that you don't now, but what I'm going to say, what we've learned, what I've learned vicariously through you has made this an easier process, and I think of greater quality and even a resource that's much more needed than even we thought in the beginning.
Yeah.
So thank you for leading us into a sweet spot and into the future.
Thank you. And thanks for listening. As we continue this journey of hope together, may you claim the sweet spot of hope. And consider your answer to this question. What are your hopes and dreams? Hope is an equal opportunity resource available to everyone. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/335. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.